Hey y'all, how's everything going? Welcome to the GI Justin channel. I've got a lot to get to on this lovely Friday afternoon. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to turn the channel on and check it out. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different topics today. And when we do, if you guys see something you want to talk more about, throw it in the comments and we'll chat some more about it. So first topic I want to talk with you about today is something that's kind of a buzzword lately and has been in the news quite a bit lately, and I think is a little overdue on the channel for some information about it and to give you guys some insight into what this stuff actually is. So first thing I want to talk to you about is something Russia is using at length as a new technology to kind of even the battlefield as it can, and China and definitely us are also interested in this as well, and that hypersonic missiles. So what are they? How are they being employed, and what can we do about them? Are obviously the three big questions that you would have when it comes to how to deal with these systems. So first off, hypersonic missiles are exactly what they sound like. They're missiles that just go really, really stinking fast. And how fast is fast, you might wonder? Well, it's about 5 times the speed of sound. Uh, that's pretty darn fast. We're looking at upwards of about 3,000 miles an hour, depending on altitude, because with altitude, the speed of sound changes. So the first thing I want to say when it comes to these hypersonics is they're not something new. Hypersonics have been around, believe it or not, since World War II. The Germans had a rocket called the V2, which was one of Hitler's wonder weapons that was going to turn the war around for them. And the V2, believe it or not, traveled fast enough to qualify as a hypersonic missile. So this is not new technology that magically just, the Russians and the Chinese have perfected. It's actually just an idea that's been around for quite a while. So the second thing when it comes to hypersonics is, believe it or not, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that pretty much everybody utilizes as the, part of the nuclear deterrent that we have in America, as well as Russia and China and all these other countries. They're hypersonic as well, because most of these intercontinental ballistic missiles will travel into the upper areas of the atmosphere, get going really, really fast, and then as they're coming back down, gravity will take them into the hypersonic range as they are traveling to wherever their target may be located as a warhead. So that's kind of the basis of where they come from. That it's a technology that began in the 1940s. So one of the things to note for sure about hypersonics is, since this is not a new technology, we actually do have several air defense platforms that are capable of tracking hypersonic weapons. It's not something where they're these stealth missiles that they've been made out to be that are impossible to see because they're going so fast. We actually have multiple systems that are capable of keeping an eye on these things and spotting them. Biggest of which, of course, are the air defense radars that we've created to deal with Russian ICBMs for, since the 1950s. So that's the biggest thing. What makes new hypersonic missiles like the Kinzhal, which is what is being released by MiG-31 fighter bombers in Ukraine, what makes them special is their maneuverability. Typically at high speeds, the amount of drag and force put on an airframe is what keeps it from being able to go faster. And most earlier hypersonic weapons have to travel in a very specific straight line, because going at that speed, they can't maneuver whatsoever. But these new systems are capable of maneuvering due to advanced composite technology, and in something we'll talk about here in a minute, some new style engines that make it possible for them to maneuver a little bit. So there are two varieties of hypersonic missiles. The first one is a glide vehicle. Now, a glide vehicle is basically exactly what it sounds like. More of the traditional style, where it's kind of got the the intercontinental ballistic missile warhead style of system, where it will glide down to its target without much in the way of maneuverability. They basically use power to get to altitude, and then are unpowered as they descend, and don't have a whole lot of maneuverability. They are very hard to shoot down, because in the range of the hypersonics, they are on the higher end of the spectrum, headed toward Mach 10, as high, believe it or not, as Mach 25, which is very, very difficult to shoot down, because getting a solution on where to shoot it at is the hard part, because it's moving so fast. Think of it as, with both of these styles, if you have ever been skeet shooting, you have to shoot where your pellets will meet the target, not where the target is now. And that's what makes shooting this style and the other style down so difficult. The second style is the hypersonic cruise missile. That's what we're seeing now utilized in Ukraine. And they usually travel about Mach 5 to Mach 10, and they are very expensive to own. Some of them cost in the high millions of dollars, and some of them cost as much as an F-35 fighter jet does to utilize, which is why you don't see a lot of the very exotic ones being utilized in Ukraine. And what they do is they utilize very exotic engines called scramjets, which suck in the air, hyperheat it, and then launch it out the back to move very, very, very fast. It is similar technology to what was on the SR-71 that we utilized as a spy plane from the 1960s until who knows when. So these things are more maneuverable because they have control surfaces on them, and they have to do more to move faster, so their range is not very, very, very far, but they're also very tough to shoot down because instead of moving in a straight line, they do have a little bit of maneuverability. So now you're adding that maneuverability to the solution of how to shoot it down, where you may plan your shot to shoot it down, and as soon as you launch that thing, if it maneuvers, your data on that missile may be inaccurate and you may miss it. So that's kind of the deal there. And these hypersonic missiles have been in design for decades. They are not a brand new thing whatsoever. And as missiles go, they are very fast, but they are not insanely faster than missiles that we currently operate that are considered more conventional in terms of their speed. They're greatly hyped by Russia and China as untouchable, uncatchable, unseen missiles. And that just isn't necessarily the case. We have many platforms that can spot these things. The final thing we're going to say about the hypersonics is news has come out recently that the Ukrainians have figured out how to shoot them down using our Patriot missile systems. Granted, highly likely, and I'm speaking from no knowledge of this whatsoever, but highly likely that we are assisting them in that endeavor to better help ourselves in that endeavor should the need for it ever arise. But the Patriot missile system was developed in the 1980s, but here we are with new revolutions of it that are now capable of both tracking and shooting down these hypersonic missiles. So are they cool? Absolutely. Are they the next evolution of missile? Yes, they are. Are they unstoppable world beaters? No, they're not. And between their very, very hefty price tag and the difficulty in manufacturing them at a high pace, they may not be the wonder weapon, to use the World War II German term, that the Russians are looking for, but they are definitely a move toward the future. So that's kind of the little primer on hypersonic missiles. And like I said, if you guys have questions about this, pop them in the comments and I'll answer a lot more about that. So next topic I want to touch in on is something we did a story on earlier about the bird flu that is in the H5N1 bird flu that is in England right now that is causing a lot of problems amongst the population because they're concerned that it can transmit itself to humans. Well, that's proving to be true. 2 humans are now noted to be infected with this bird flu. So the thing that's scary about it is 50% fatal in humans. And if there are humans now being infected by it, what are the possibilities that it may not be able to be quite so contained? I think that is something worth continuing watching on, and I'll definitely stay on top of that as well. I just thought I might throw that in the video today so you guys can see that it does appear that there is some bird-to-human transmission going on. Next thing I want to talk to you about is something we talk about all the time because it's a big, big story right now, and that is what else is going on in the war in Ukraine. So the first thing is there was a rocket that landed in Poland, and final research has proven that it did in fact come from a Russian launcher. So to me, this is a serious problem, and the reason I say that, most of the wars that we have ever been involved in when it comes to these things, a lot of them happen by accident. Where we don't necessarily plan to get drawn into war, something happens that is either intended or unintended that pulls us in. And this is a perfect example. If this rocket as it landed, now granted, according to the research, the tip of the rocket was not cased with explosives, but actually concrete. And the reason for that most likely is It provides some stability to long-range rockets, gives them a little bit of more of a weighted forend, keeping them on track, on target longer, which is actually a good thing because if it had been explosives, could have been a problem. Um, but the deal there is what happens with this happening again? What happens if Polish soldiers, American soldiers stationed in Poland, the moment one of them is killed, it's on. NATO responds. They draw up the articles, and all of NATO is required to come to the aid and protection of Poland. And then you've got the early makings of World War III, where all of NATO is lined up on one side and all of Russia is lined up on the other. And there we go from there. So the next piece of this we're going to discuss today, it appears that Ukraine is in the makings of kicking off the counteroffensive to retake a bunch of their territory. And for all intents and purposes, it appears that the Russians are in a tough tactical situation because on one hand, the commander of their mercenary forces, who accounts for about 50% of their soldiers, is pretty disaffected and pretty unhappy with what Russia is doing. And I did a video about that. And if you haven't watched it, go back and have a look about what's going on with the Russian mercenary Wagner group. But the other thing is there's a lot of reports coming out through open source intelligence saying that the Russians may be out of reserves, that everything they have left is what they have. And if the Ukrainians are pushing for a offensive, having no reserves if you're the Russians is a big, big problem. So if that's the case, with this invasion, this kind of brings this up, but the Ukrainians should not expect to rout and win the war and completely kick the Russians out. The goal for them, I think, has to be to make this war unpalatable, to make the Russians tired of being there, tired of seeing Russian caskets coming home, tired of seeing all their money go to a war that they genuinely don't super care about. And I think that's going to kind of be the case for the only way that they can expect to get out of there when it comes to this offensive that they're planning. So last big thing on Russia, it appears with this counteroffensive that the Ukrainians are going to launch that the Russians' best and only plan that they haven't super kicked off yet is going to be a thing called interdiction, where they need to be attacking the Ukrainian counteroffensive before it can kick off so that it can never get online. And I'm going to be curious over the next couple of days as this offensive apparently begins in earnest to see if the Russians try to do that at all using some of these hypersonic missiles that we just talked about, or if they are going to hunker down and take a defensive posture and just hold on through this counteroffensive. So, the big question too, do they have the ability to interdict this counteroffensive before it takes off? That's a question too, because we just don't know what the Russians are capable of at this point in terms of offensive attacks beyond just rocket and artillery attacks. That seems to be their MO right now. And without the Wagner group, how are they going to manage that? That is another big, big question, I think. So, final thing I want to talk to you guys about, and it is something that is close to my heart as, a soldier. Afghanistan is in the news again because it appears that ISIS-K, which is basically the ISIS arm in Afghanistan, is taking prominence and is making inroads in overtaking the Taliban as the primary form of government in Afghanistan. So far, in the little over a year that we've been gone, there have been 283 attacks by ISIS on the Taliban, to include suicide attacks, complex attacks, and symbolic attacks on targets of no actual military value whatsoever. As part of that, the Taliban has been responding by using a bunch of the gear we left and raiding ISIS positions, putting these two at odds with each other. And the thing that's interesting about that, the two of them ideologically are not that far off. I think it's more a matter of control and power. I think they are emboldened by our departure, and they are further emboldened by the fact that we're not doing anything about it. We're allowing these guys. Maybe we're thinking, hey, let them fight it out. The more of them that kill each other, the less we have to deal with later on. That could be the pace. But it's one of those things that I think is worth paying attention to and noting, because further on top of that, the 9/11 plan was drawn up in Afghanistan. The safe haven for Al-Qaeda was Afghanistan. And we can't act like just because we're out of there, it no longer exists, even though we left in the manner in which we did. So I think that's something else, yet again, that is destabilizing to our American situation. And we really need to figure out what we want to do. Are we going to support the Taliban? God, I hope not. But are we going to do some drone strikes? Maybe some other kinetic things that we may possibly be able to do? I don't know. I think we need to do something. I don't think we can just allow Afghanistan to fester into fundamentalist ideology again, even though it's already back in Taliban hands. So, thank you guys so much for watching the channel. I truly appreciate the time. Down here in the corner, right there, if you haven't already done it, it's going to be a circle with a helicopter in it. That is me in the aforementioned Afghanistan flying around. Go ahead and click that thing. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel so I can bring you more cool information about what's going on in the world and, just a smattering of some prepper stuff as well and some economic news and other current events in the world. So thank you guys so much. Thanks for commenting. I really appreciate being able to go back and forth with you guys. And if you have questions or anything you want to talk about with what we talked about today, go right ahead